All right. Hi, everybody. We're here with fan meetups from Fan Expo Toronto, and we're here to talk about Dungeons and Dragons again. I'm your fan meetups ambassador, Jeremy Johnston, and I'm with.
And I'm Angelo Corsito, administrator of Unite the Factions.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, Angelo. As per usual, just want to let you know that we're here to answer any of your questions in the chat. We've put a Q&A here, and of course, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can hit us up in the comments. Please be kind. And or you can visit us at unitethefactions.com, where you can find a link to our Discord server where
we're fairly active on that.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, if we can't answer something, someone else can. But today we wanted to talk about Eberron. And, a lot of people might think, well, what is Eberron? Is it a place? Is it a person? It's both, actually. But it's also a Dungeons and Dragons campaign setting. And so I guess just to give you some ideas of what campaign settings are, if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition and you've been playing a lot of the published hardcover books, you've been playing in a setting called the Forgotten Realms. But that is not the original setting that was used for Dungeons and Dragons when it kicked off about 45 years ago. That would have been Greyhawk, which is mentioned. You can hear mention of a lot of the different settings in the Dungeon Master's Guide for 5th edition. So, and there's, little sprinkles of it in a lot of different books, especially when talking about, where you can use different classes and such. Angelo, do you have any that come to mind?
So other than literally the Forgotten Realms, because I've only been playing Dungeons and Dragons for the last 3 and a bit years, that is the only other setting that I've actually played in is Eberron.
Okay. All right. Well, some of the other ones that people are talking about are Dragonlance, which is a big fan favorite that people are asking for. There's also Spelljammer Confirmed, which people are clamoring for constantly.
You did it. You did. You said it.
Well, I can't actually say that Spelljammer's confirmed, but
no, but we can still pretend
that is the running joke. But there's also Dark Sun is another interesting setting. Ravenloft is often considered a setting, and the other Dread Realms, of which they're actually coming out with a book in May about. Thanks, Angela, for texting that Spelljammer is confirmed, because, yeah, we're the ones who can say it, right?
It's not happening.
No. Yeah, maybe. We're hoping. But anyways, we're here to talk about Eberron. And Eberron is actually a newer setting. It's only been around for, a little less than 20 years. But it all started with a contest. Wizards of the Coast wanted to find a new setting for Dungeons & Dragons 3.5. And they put it out to the community saying, pitch your ideas, give us some pages and pages and pages full of content that really flesh out and show that, you've done some world building and such. They got 11,000 submissions.
Yeah.
That was 2002. Yeah, that was 2002. So 19 years ago. So yeah, it's been almost 20 years since the contest started. And they got it down to about a dozen entries, and they asked those people to, produce even more content and, background world building information for their creations. And ultimately somebody won that contest, and that person was Keith Baker. He won a monetary prize of $100,000, and the winning really meant that he was getting his own, campaign setting book coming out, which would then lead to many others across 3.5, 4th edition, and now even 5th edition. The first book came out in June of 2004, and it was aptly named the Ebron campaign setting. And actually, someone who's still on the D&D team or has returned to the D&D team was one of the co-authors, James Wyatt, as well as Bill Slavichek. And I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But since then, fast forward to 5th edition, and there was actually a really interesting thing that happened in 2018. They decided to, test out the idea of putting out, another campaign setting book, but they did so on DM's Guild with a PDF called Wayfair's Guide to Eberron. Again, from Keith Baker, because he's definitely the master behind everything Eberron.
Yes, he is. And that was interesting because that spawned, because it was like it wasn't exactly like it was official content, but at the same time it put out a rule set that was pretty official.
Yeah, it even found its way to D&D Beyond, and was announced at one of the early streams that WotC, or Wizards of the Coast, had, where they were, kicking off all of their new seasonal products and such. We've since, though, got a second go at it for 5th edition in Ebron called Rising from the Last War, and it was printed in hardcover in November of 2019. And so between the two books, there's a lot of content there that gives you the background of the setting. What is the world like? Who are its peoples? Monsters, magic, and everything in between.
Yeah. So when you think about Eberron, Eberron is in itself, it is on the prime material plane. It shares the same plane as where the Forgotten Realms are in Toril, except that it is a planet that was created by the struggle from 3 cosmic dragons of immense power. The 3 dragons were Sybaris, Eberron, and Kyber. Sybaris was is kind of like was quote unquote perished, and they say her blood is what created the weave and the surrounding ring around Eberron. Now that's significant because that is why planar travel doesn't happen in and around Eberron. Because it affect the Ring of Sybaris prevents any sort of planar travel, including spelljammers.
Yes, that's a very good point. But long story short on that one is don't take plane shift. It's not going to work.
No. The other 2 dragons got engaged in this like massive conflict where they were fighting each other for a very long time. And Ebron, the dragon Ebron, decided that they couldn't win totally. So what they did is they enveloped and surrounded Kyber instead. And that is why Eberron is called the dragon we walk upon, because that represents the planet's surface. Whereas Kyber is kind of like the in-between. It's kind of like a cave system, a cave network in the center of the planet, much like the Underdark in the Forgotten Realms. And it's where all the demons and the devils and all the really like evil monsters are in Eberron.
Yeah, there's no 9 hells in Eberron.
Everything is contained.
Kyber, yeah, for sure. But yeah, you do mention something important about the whole planar travel thing. What happens in Eberron stays in Eberron, like legit. People don't come and go from Eberron. It would have to be something super extraordinary, or something that you've cooked up in your own homebrew campaign, perhaps. So more than just again, the cosmic dragon Ebron being the planet, Ebron is a place that's got a lot of different working themes kind of behind everything that kind of drive the sorts of adventures you might choose to have there, but they're themes that are prevalent and suggested in a lot of the content that is there. So one of those things is that magic is commonplace and used like technology.
Yeah, they say that arcane magic in Eberron isn't so much high magic like you would find in the Forgotten Realms. It's much, and those spells exist because of a point that I will make soon. But the main thing to know about Eberron is that magic is science, effectively. Like they use it much like we use science, as in like they use continue flame spells to light up the streets. They use bits of other spells to create like things like the lightning rails and such and so on and so forth. Uh, it's the magic is considered wide instead of deep.
Right. Yeah. High level magic is extremely rare, but low level magic is prevalent. So that's one key theme that you can kind of tug at and use in games that you play there, or if you're a player, things that hopefully your DM is incorporating into the experience. Uh, Another angle is that uh, the world's been so busy doing something that we'll talk about right after this that a lot of people don't quite realize the rich lore and history of Ebron itself, and so people are kind of re-exploring these things in a kind of Raiders of the Lost Ark kind of vibe, like Indiana Jones.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that is on that I've seen is on all of the different cover. Yeah, Eberron goblins is a huge one because they aren't like goblins here in the Forgotten Realms.
Yep.
They are completely different, but we will touch on that soon. What was my train of thought that I just lost? Because
I think you're going to talk about the theme that you can explain better than I can.
No, I literally blanked.
Okay, the whole noir angle.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, Eberron. If you look at every book that has Eberron, it's got this one quote in it, and it says, if it has a place for it in the Forgotten Realms in D&D, there is a place for it in Eberron, but it might not be what you're used to. Now, Eberron is a very noir kind of setting where they've got like where things can go wrong, things are dangerous, things are much more complicated and complex. There's a lot more gray. There's a lot less like good guys win because they make this decision. There's good guys have to take this action in order to not lose, and it's still not a good action. Like there's a lot more of that kind of like gritty, rough and tumble stuff as opposed to like clean cut good guys versus bad guys that you find in the Forgotten Realms quite a bit.
Yeah, and again, these are tools for dungeon masters as well as for players, So dungeon masters hopefully can pull on these threads to put together a campaign in the setting, and players can work some of these things or all of these things into their background perhaps, and have a lot of fun with it. So let's talk about what's been happening in Eberron for the last 100 years or so.
So the most recent book that they released was called Rising from the Last War, because the last war was a massive 100 years almost long conflict that was happening on the continent of Corvair in Eberron that abruptly ended. And
yeah, and it's been a war. Before we get to that specific event, again, it's a war of almost 100 years, and Keith Baker, the author, has likened it to World War I and World War II in terms of how the general population experienced these dark times with lots of people dying, a spin up of industry, and people having to like go from making goods to making war and weapons and such. And when you think about 100 years of that sort of thing, like what does that do to a people? What does that do to a culture? Like 2 whole generations have kind of lived through war. If you're looking at kind of the human lifespan or life expectancy.
And speaking of that, it led to an entire new race called the Warforged, which were specifically created just to fight in the last war.
Yes, and they're people too.
They are. They
I'm not
are.
sure
They
if they
are.
have a soul, but
They are. They are. They are
probably do.
creatures made. They are sentient creatures made of metal that have a fibrous wood kind of nervous system that has this fluid that's pumped through it that keeps all of their functions running. It's very
Yeah,
cool, actually.
yeah, indeed. There are a lot of neat races that we'll get into, as well as cultures. But yeah, there was something that brought the war to an end.
The very abrupt end known as the Cataclysm.
Hmm.
And Jeremy, how do you pronounce that the land that the Cataclysm happened in?
Yeah, well, uh, that's a fun fact about Eberron. The name of this place is spelt Cyre, and so some people call it Seer, some people call it Sire, or Siri, or Kiri. But the funny thing is that you know Keith has gone on the record to say you pronounce it however you want, but I've heard it pronounced Seer most often. And yeah, this abrupt end to the war was the destruction of this entire place. Like Seer as a massive, you know, land area, tens of thousands of people just wiped out in a magical nuclear explosion of
Yeah,
sorts.
like like a seer was one of the more like technologically advanced like of the countries on Corvair,
Yeah,
effectively. And in a day, in an instant, it just exploded basically and became this like magical wasteland known as the Mournlands, because they call that the Day of Mourning when that happened.
yeah, like a whole nation just wiped out, just like that. Woof,
Blinked.
gone, just gone. Nobody is taking responsibility for this,
Nobody
uh,
knows how it happened.
no, or no one's telling.
No, yeah,
And again, this is something that depending on how you run or play your campaign, might be something that people might want to learn about. Um, Hopefully, you're not responsible for it. It depends. You could play pre Cataclysm, after the Cataclysm, but generally speaking, the setting is setting you up for after the Cataclysm. And
now
there's
it
no
is
winner.
the recent stuff.
There's no winner for this war. Between the
Nope.
five nations warring.
It was a
Uh,
100-year long battle between five nations that was incredibly bloody and then just suddenly ended.
yeah. Uh, and so again, people have only known war for the past 100 years, and then suddenly it all ends. How can anyone be happy with that result? You know, Nothing has
It
the power has not shifted.
and it's led to like a cold war of sorts between the
Hmm.
remaining nations that are kind of like all pointing at each other, going, "Which one of you did this?" To like unofficially, of course, but
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Again, no one's taking responsibility for
yeah.
anything. I mean, your guess is as good as mine. And again, it makes for some interesting, plot threads,
Hmm.
and just tools in general.
So speaking of that, well, the Draconic Prophecy
Hmm.
is an interesting narrative tool that Eberron uses in order to kind of facilitate things. It we know it as a DM tool, and it's not an actual like set of stuff that's been written down. It's everything that's currently happening in Eberron is part of the Draconic Prophecy. So you can use it as a narrative tool to give your players hints, to kind of weave stories together, that sort of
Yeah.
thing.
Give them threads to pull on.
And yep, and that sort of thing is very useful because anytime you need a plot device or something, you can just leak a fragment of the Draconic Prophecy
Mhm.
and or have them go searching for a fragment of the Draconic Prophecy. It's a very interesting narrative tool.
For sure. And Adventures League is pulling on that thread big time.
Very hard pulling on that thread, but we'll get to that in a little bit too.
Exactly. So, more than just, the war and the cataclysm, there's industry in Ebron. and a whole bunch of monopolies of industry. And these are the Dragonmarked Houses. So maybe we can start talking about that, Angelo.
Yes. So the Dragonmark Houses is another part of the Draconic Prophecy, where these marks of these houses, they're called dragon marks, um, all weave together onto certain, to very specific races and to very specific people, and
Yeah, and
when they
bloodlines.
manifest, and bloodlines, and when they manifest, they give you quite a bit of, they give you these abilities that your house is known for.
Yeah, and they've taken these abilities to the nth degree, creating whole industries surrounding them, and monopolies and hierarchies around everything. Um, and so we're going to go through some of them to give you an idea of what they are. And again, they're only going to manifest in certain bloodlines, and it's not 100%. Of
Nope.
course, when you're creating your character, you can pick, one of the races that's associated with one of these marks, and take a background that you're a member of one of these houses, and like as a house agent, because they have that in the new Ebron book for 5th edition.
Mhm.
But again, yeah, not everybody of that race or of that family, might manifest one of these marks. But the cool thing is as a player, working with your DM, you can see about working that into your story. And the first mark is the mark of detection. And these are, yeah, again, like tattoos that manifest when you hit adolescence. So kind of like
Yep.
becoming a mutant in the X-Men type of thing.
Yep. They just
And
show up on you,
yeah, they just show up, and
and you
then
have these new abilities.
yeah. So, and with most player characters starting in adolescence or young adulthood, you're going to have that mark when you start. It's probably not something you'd grow into per se, as you pick it at character creation. So yeah, this first one, the mark of detection, is the trademark of House Madani. Uh, and House Madani brokers services as bodyguards and inquisitives. And as such, this is a variant of a half elf race, and you're going to get like detect magic, detect poison and disease. And then at 3rd level, not unlike some of the other races that include magic spells, you'll get an additional spell, and that's see invisibility. Uh,
Yep. Each one of these marks has their own spell list that they just get at certain levels, and it's pretty neat,
yeah,
the things that they can just get for being part of that house. Like then you like the next one is the House Therashik, which these names are all very hard to pronounce for me, at least, because D&D names. And this is the mark of finding, which can be found on either humans or half orcs. And what it does, it's kind of like they're the ones who are the actual bounty hunters, and they go around and they track people down for coin. Basically, they get things like hunter's mark, locate object, that sort of thing as part of their house.
yeah. The next one is for House Vidalis, the mark of handling. They're, I would say, one of the more mundane houses. They are big in the industry of meats and mounts. I don't know if the mounts are the meat, but could be, and more. Their mark gives you spells like animal friendship, speak with animals, that sort of thing. And again, they've built their industry on using those abilities.
And we'll just do a couple more of these because there's 12 of them, and to talk about them
Yeah,
all would take forever. So the next one we'll talk about belongs to House Jerkaso, which is the Halfling House of Healing. It's a mark that manifests on halflings, and it basically allows you to cast all sorts of cool healing spells that are very useful for keeping your allies alive.
Okay, if we're going to reduce the number of houses we're talking about, then the next one we have to talk about is probably my favorite one.
I was going to suggest this. If you didn't take it, I was going to.
Yeah, well, we need to talk about this one and those other two, if you know what I mean.
Okay, sure.
So, House Cannith. Okay, so House Cannith is really the great manufacturer of everything mystical and mundane. They have the mark of making, but they are also the house that created the Warforged. So, when you're the house that can actually make a living race, we can't not mention them. They have mending as a cantrip to start. They can cast magic weapon, elemental weapon, fabricate, stone shape creation. They got a whole bunch of things that you can pull from it as you kind of go through the different spell levels. But there's a lot of wizards, of course, in this one, as well as maybe this other class that became popular in Eberron that we'll talk about.
The other one is the one who basically run all the lightning rails because they're really cool. Those are really cool. Which is they bear the mark of passage, which is House Orient, and they're all about mobility and movement. So I automatically really like this house personally because they get my favorite spell at fourth when they get 4th level slots, which is Dimension Door, and we go basically just up from there.
And then the last house that we wanted to mention, just because we love cool stuff, is House Larandar. So House Larandar has the mark of the storm. They have long been, the people that move people around via, water, and vessels, galleons, that sort of thing. And those ships use air and water elementals, again, because, Ebron's using magic as technology in really cool ways. But, I said air elementals, so yeah, they've taken their knowledge and within the past 10 years, they've actually created airships. And, again, going back to this idea that everybody or every one of these houses has a monopoly, you might think, well, how can they have a monopoly if they just create these things? Well, why can't other people? Well, for example, when an airship can only be piloted with someone with a bloodline and the actual dragon mark to match, that's how they're locking these things down.
Yep. Will not fly without somebody with that mark.
No, but we did say flying, and we did mention lightning rails. So yes, there are trains and there are airships in this setting. It's really cool stuff. They even have sky coaches, which are like air taxis, miniature versions of the airships, as well as sky sleds, which are like, hoverboards on crack.
So the good question about the Aberrant dragon marks is the cool thing about those is that nobody really knows why those started showing up.
Maybe we could find out in the Draconic Prophecy.
They just started manifesting on people, from what I understand. Again, my knowledge on Ebron is quite novice, and the from what I understand, the Aberrant dragon marks just showed up one day, and like they were crazy because they were like, these people don't belong to any houses, but they still have dragon marks. How is this a thing? And it was like its own narrative tool.
And this one's a little different for player characters. The Aberrant dragon marks are feats. So instead of being a variant of one of the races associated with, the specific marks, anybody can get these. And again, it is a feat that you can choose as a player. You then learn the cantrip of your choice. Your con goes up by 1 to a maximum of 20. And then when you cast a 1st level spell through that mark, because you get to choose 1 1st level spell from the sorcerer's list, you can expend a hit dice, and if you roll an even number, you gain 10 hit points. If you roll an odd, some random creature is going to get blasted with force damage equal to what you rolled. And if no one else is around within that 30 feet, you're going to take the damage.
Yeah, so the exactly. Because remember, you are a target within range.
Yeah, definitely.
But this one specifically does say not including you.
Yeah. But if no other creatures are in range, you take it. So
yeah, so you just eat it, but
yeah.
So you can't choose you when
No.
determining randomly, but if there's nobody else.
Yeah, exactly. So, beyond the setting and these cool ideas, I hate comparing it to the Forgotten Realms, but in the Forgotten Realms, at least for 5th edition, we've spent most of our time in the Sword Coast. There's no denying that. That's where most of the action has been. And in a somewhat similar fashion, the setting of Corvair within Eberron as a continent, it is kind of where all the action is happening as well. It's where the war between the 5 nations was happening. It's where Seer was destroyed, and it's where the moorlands are left behind. But it is only one of 7 continents on the planet. But it is again where all the action is.
Yes, it's the one that has about. I think I heard Keith. I was watching a bunch of things in preparation for this, and Keith Baker was saying I think like 90% of the published content is in Corvair, but the other stuff is so rich and so like heavy that if people go digging, you can create some pretty cool stories there.
Yeah, for sure. And they do talk a bit about each. And of course, in older editions or on wikis or googling stuff, you can pull up a lot more again that you can kind of feed off of and add to whatever story you're trying to weave. Whether again, you could be a dungeon master doing that, or maybe you're a player, and that's where your background, is pulling from.
You came from one of the lands that is oh man, I wish I remember the name of it. It's one of the 7 continents, but it is basically a continent where all of the ogres and all the trolls and all of like the traditionally like giant and like monstrous races in air quotes, because we're about to touch on that when we talk about Sharon, are trying to build like a functional society where they are just like everybody else, and it's cool because not a lot of the other campaign settings have that.
Yeah, definitely. And you said what we were going to talk about next, which is the city of Sharon. So again, a big, just like Corvair is, the big continent that, where most of the action's going to happen. The city of Sharon gets its own chapter in the latest book. Because it's one of those big cities, again, not unlike the Forgotten Realms like Waterdeep or Baldur's Gate or Neverwinter. It's one of the places where there's a lot going on, and it's called the City of Towers. So I myself think of Coruscant or from Star Wars, the city planet, and just massive buildings all over the place, or even like New York City in The Fifth Element, if you've seen that film. And generally speaking, the higher you are, the higher your class. It is
richer you are, the higher you live.
Yeah, exactly.
It's got all layers, and every layer's got like its own caste system. It's quite
Yeah, it is pretty rigid in that way. And, alongside the Dragonmarked Houses and how they, kind of choose to set up their industries within the city of Sharon, can make for some, pretty interesting storytelling.
Mm-hmm. And that's where a lot more of your like social like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like not social deduction, but kind of like different like campaigns that can have more like intrigue and mystery and that sort of thing would happen more in Sharn than as opposed to like your more Borderlands style game, which would be like if you're running and gunning in the Mournlands.
Yeah, which is what that AL campaign feels like to me.
Well, I've only done the first 4, so I don't know beyond that.
Yeah. Well,
if they've changed anything.
And one thing that I do like that they have made mention of in the Ebron campaign setting is universities.
Hmm.
You know, like I didn't, get a thread like that from a lot of other campaign settings, but people do go to school, to learn. Whether it's archaeology or if it's magic or any number of studies. But universities do play a part in what's described in the city of Sharon, and it could be an interesting thing that you can play with. Maybe your background is a professor, or maybe the professor is a patron of the group and might be sending them out, on some fact-finding mission or finding an artifact or something like that. There's a lot you can do with something like that and the way they
Yep.
describe it.
It's definitely different compared to like other campaign settings where they have like for example, the Forgotten Realms has like Candlekeep, but that's not necessarily like a university.
No.
It's got like the host tower of the arcane, but again, that's not so much like a place. That's more
Hmm.
of like a you get in if you're called in, but there's no like you don't go to school or anything before you get there. It's not like you can just enroll. It's different. It's very different.
Yeah, well, like you said from the quote, we've got the stuff from Forgotten Realms, but it's going to be different.
Yep.
Yeah, and the city of Sharn, is a metropolitan city. There's a lot of different races that live there. People get around on these sky coach taxis, if they can afford them, of course. People travel between cities using the lightning rail trains. So, of course, there's all the infrastructure that goes with. There are train stations, right? There's people that work at these places. There's also cargo that moves by rail. So
Hmm.
again, lots of interesting things you can pull on that are slightly different than the caravans.
Yeah, like the hilarious one is where you've got the actual train heist, where you've got a skyship that's
Yeah,
bearing down on a lightning rail train, and you got people dropping down. And my man, I just want to do that now.
totally, totally. Fly by on sky sleds and all that cool stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Um, but yeah, the so the other thing that Eberron does slightly differently is that they have their its own mechanic. Um, whereas like the where the Forgotten Realms has inspiration as like a mechanic for the DMs, the Eberron tends to have hero points, which is more of like a it's a more like a one check based thing where it's basically the equivalent of bardic inspiration where you can spend it on an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw, and it gives you an extra d6.
Yeah. Now, this mechanic is actually from the Dungeon Master's Guide, but it
Hmm.
features prominently in Eberron and the Adventures League adventures that have been set in Eberron. And generally speaking, you can set out, different kind of milestones or checkpoints over the course of an adventure that you might play, where you then might give somebody those hero points, and then, allow them to again use it kind of like the bardic inspiration, um, and maybe use them on a death save.
Yeah, because that's one thing that you could do with hero points is that you can turn a failed death save into a success.
And that in itself is extremely potent, especially in a place where resurrection magic is near impossible to find.
Yes, it's one of the things that that the setting kind of advertises that high magic, and especially resurrection, is complicated and incredibly rare.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, our heroes might, if they're clerics or druids and such, they might gain access to these things. But, the adventurers that are that experienced to get those levels of magics is quite rare.
Mhm.
You're not just going to go to your, corner store like you can in Waterdeep, and if you
Yeah,
got the
just pick
coin,
up,
you can
you
make it
just pick up
happen.
1,000 gold diamond and resurrect
Yeah,
yourself.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
totally fine.
Exactly. Yeah,
He got better.
yeah. There's a reason why there's a death curse.
Yeah.
Resurrection was too good for people.
All
But
right, speaking of where you were mentioning clerics and druids,
yeah,
Eberron does have a whole bunch of new classes and new races that it brought to the table.
yeah, as well as for the existing races that you might be familiar with from the Forgotten Realms, the culture is different, and I think that's something we really need to kind of just jump into for a second. More than how we kind of alluded to, other continents that have up and coming, cities, built by orcs or ogres and such. But the city of Sharon, like I said, it's a metropolitan place. A lot of multiculturalism there, and as soon as you see a goblin, you're not you. Well, if you're from the Forgotten Realms and you see a goblin, when you're walking down the street, you might wonder if you need to shoot them or not. That's just how that has been kind of worked into the lore. It's a common monster more so than a playable race historically. Even for fifth edition, Goblin wasn't there right away,
Yeah,
and they
came
are
later.
considered a monstrous race. But here they are not considered monstrous races.
In fact, they were the ones who built the majority of the infrastructure in Sharn.
Indeed. So that you just have to kind of take that and under consideration when playing out these different races. So my kind of favorite race it might not surprise the people that know me, but my favorite race is the Changeling. And obviously, because you can change what you look like. It's almost like having a mask of many faces as a warlock. If you want to impersonate people, be kind of like a spy, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's one of those things where if you are running a very heavy like social slash like inquisitive slash kind of more like social encounter based setting, the changeling can just break that because they kill somebody or capture somebody and now they're that person for free. Everything about them, even some memories, which is nuts. Um, brings us to, well, we talk about races, though, as the new one that they added that I really like is the Kalashtar. They have a quarry spirit, which allows them to kind of get some very interesting, neat little telepathic and kind of mental abilities, and gives them a little bit more thing where their spirit is from a different plane itself that kind of found their way to Eberron somehow through the spirit shield thing, basically that was done by one of the dragons when
Cerberus.
When Sybaris died. That these quarry spirits still managed to find their way to Eberron and create an entire race a while ago. And it's a really fascinating kind of aspect of that where they are quite interesting. Then we got two other ones beyond Changeling and Kalashtar. There are shifters.
Yeah, they're shifters, which is kind of like a half werewolf sort of in terms of their physicality and such. They kind of have that hybrid form going on, and there's even like different versions of the shifters within them. They are Beast Hide, Long Tooth, Swift Drive, and Wild Hunt, and they kind of work certain. I'm not going to say monsters, more like animals into how they, shapeshift and such. They do have dark vision, which is worth mentioning because it's always a good idea to have dark vision. But they can take on this more kind of hybrid bestial appearance. And instead of like the changeling and transformation, they call this shifting. Hence shifters. Lasts for about a minute. And then, based on your kind of sub race, it's going to change the features that you get. So, you might have claws, or you might have some additional hit points and all sorts of
Or you might have
fangs.
more armor. You might have more like speed. There's some interesting ones.
Yes, but it's interesting. It's fun, and even the idea. That you can kind of, be somewhat like a wolf or a cat or a badger. It's just kind of cool.
It allows you to for temporarily completely alter yourself and become slightly stronger for a short period of time, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And then for new races, last but not least, there's the Warforged, which we touched on a bit earlier. Just to go a little bit deeper, they were effectively created as soldiers, and now that the wars ended, they're like, what do we do? So at first they were like mercenaries because that's the next logical step from soldier. But then they started to branch out. Now you have Warforged bards, you have Warforged clerics, you have Warforged paladins, where they never had Warforged wizards, where they never had these opportunities before because they were literally just created to go fight.
Yeah. And again, they come with armor built in, which is pretty cool. Could work into some pretty interesting builds depending on the class that you want to put together. One of the things that's cool too, and I guess it's kind of how you want to build your Warforged, but they have a tool proficiency that they come with, and I know that some people like the idea of that the tools are kind of integrated into themselves. Mm-hmm. It's kind of an angle to play with.
You get like that R2D2, it pops out of your forearm, and now you've got like a socket wrench.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Ebron also added a new class, which I really like, called the Artificer.
Okay, time check. We have less than 15 minutes.
I know. So rather than me talking about this for the rest of the time, I'm just going to go very quickly over them. It was a new class that was added. They blend a lot more kind of technology into their magic. Their spells are very versatile. They have a very interesting mix of divine and arcane magic. They are builders. They have 4 really cool subclasses now with Tasha, with the armor that came out in Tasha's. All of them do very, very good different things. Like the Battlesmith can have is basically like the intelligence hexblade, right? Where they can swing any magic weapon with their intelligence modifier, which is very convenient because as an artificer, you can infuse and make magic weapons.
Yep.
The other bits, like the armorer, you basically can become Iron Man, where you have these lightning gauntlets that shoot lightning bolts out of them. Or you can get the heavy set where you have gauntlets that punch for thunder damage. It's just cool. And then you have the Alchemist, which makes all sorts of crazy potions that can be like consumed by your party members or yourself that give you really good abilities for the day. And then last but not least, there's the Artillerist, which is more of like you create these little tiny mechs, some of them that you can hold in your hand, and they can do things like cast a healing pulse or become a flamethrower, or the Force Ballista, which is basically like gives you like an Eldritch Blast almost that you have in the palm of your hand. It's quite interesting. It's a very good class. Tons of cool stuff. The only class that breaks the attunement rule, the high level artificers can attune to 6 things instead of 3, which is incredible.
Oof. OP.
Not even that. They also they also break attunement requirements. You can be the artificer that's running around with the Holy Avenger, our robes of the Archmage.
Yeah, that's just crazy.
There's a reason why they didn't allow them in Forgotten Realms for a very long time.
Yeah.
In Adventures League specifically, where magic items grow on trees.
True. So yeah, let's talk about some magic items then. So there's, before kind of getting into some of the more interesting magic items, there's this one kind of cool. I'm not sure if it's quite a magic item per se, but they're called Dragon Shards. And Dragon Shards are these crystals, and they represent actually like the 3 dragons, and you can kind of grind them into dust, and that dust can be used in place of spell components.
Just gonna put this out there. That is exactly probably where Matthew Mercer got Residuum from. He took this and made something in his own world that resembled that.
Very cool. So yeah, you just take that dust, and again, like any spell component that has a cost can be substituted with a dragon shard.
Mhm.
So definitely potent, and also is used in the construction of some magical items in the world of Ebron.
Yeah,
Um,
this is out of my depth. Jeremy knows more about this stuff than I do.
well, and so and similar are spell shards, which I think are a magic item worth mentioning. So these are polished dragon shards, and they generally can be formed into almost like pages of a book. Um, it's almost like a tablet, you know, um, you know, the way that you can use it. You can actually, if you're a wizard, actually use a spell shard as a spell book as well. So you can kind of be, going through it almost like you're kind of going through an iPad. They can be up to 320 pages long, even though it's like just like, one page. They're pretty cool, and they're a common magic item. Again, Eberron's got a lot of this, magic
Low
that is
level.
low level but extremely prevalent, and just kind of neat. Um, I guess not unlike maybe an enduring spell book or something like that. But come on, this is
It's way
almost
less cool.
yeah. I agree. I agree. Like, come on, you got to flip pages. Come on, like come to the 21st century. Get yourself a tablet or something like that. Um, but yeah, they have a lot of other cool weapons. They have like especially for the Warforged. Even in the Eberron campaign, you can get an arm blade. It's like
Yep.
yeah,
Warforged only.
yeah. And so again, kind of like the idea of having your tools kind of built into your body, your arm blade, it attaches to your arm, becomes inseparable, you know, um, and you just whip it out and start fighting with people, and then boom, when you're done, it can, kind of go back into and get retracted. Um,
Black powder weapons are a thing in Eberron because artificers have proficiency in firearms, but they're not exactly incredibly commonplace as far as I know. And if they are, then I'm mistaken, and I'm
well,
happy to admit that.
ultimately, it's going to depend on the DM, right?
Mhm.
And whether or
Whether or
not,
not you want.
yeah, exactly. Well, one cool thing too, uh, in Eberron is like wands are, something that you can, kind of buy. And again, low level magic is a thing. You might have a wand of magic missile, in your military arsenal. Have a whole bunch of people, throwing them out. So one of the cool magic items in Eberron is a wand sheath. Okay, so the wand sheath allows you to basically, it's almost like a holster for a wand, so you can, as a bonus action, get your wand out, and then kind of use it alongside what you're doing while your hands remain free. It's like a pretty cool idea.
Yeah, and they also spell storing items are a lot more prevalent, where they have like an item that contains a spell and can be used for that spell, much like the Ring of Spell Storing, but on a much larger scale, like simpler things, but more of them.
Yep.
And we've
Uh,
just got a couple things to talk about, and we're almost out of time.
Yeah,
So I just
okay.
wanted to
So,
point that out.
yeah, so monsters that you might encounter in Ebron are different as well. But one of them that I really want to touch on because I just love the idea is living spells. Yes, you heard that right. Spells that are alive, and they are creatures. They are constructs in the moorlands. One of the after effects of what happened there. So you can run into like a living burning hands, living cloud kill. Like it's coming for you. It wants to get you. It's a pretty neat idea. And there's so many more ways for a dungeon master to kind of apply those ideas to other spells that they want to terrorize. I mean, put up against their players. So in Adventures League, they have touched on Ebron a couple times. When we got the first release there in 2018 of Wayfair's Guide to Ebron, they came out with a short campaign called Embers of the Last War. And currently there's another campaign as well.
This one is called The Oracle of War, and it's quite interesting. Whereas Embers of the Last War was like a short campaign that mostly just touched on bits and pieces of them testing the setting. It was basically like a giant playtest. The Oracle of War, they've got some of the best authors that we know of, basically, that write Adventures League stuff.
Sean Merwin, James Jerkaso, so many more.
And they were writing out this setting and these adventures, and they're incredible. I've only done the first 4 of them, and I've DM'd one of them, and I'm DMing the rest of them. Basically, they've released 13 of them in this series so far, and I believe they're going to be doing 20 if I remember correctly.
That's correct. Yep, and 4 epics, 1 for each tier.
Yep, and so there are 2 epics currently, and 13 of the modules, and I will be running all of them through for our group Unite the Factions in the coming months.
And
the Oracle of War is cool also because what it does is that under certain conditions, it accurately predicts the Draconic Prophecy, which we were talking about earlier, is everything that happens in Eberron. So basically, it can predict the future, which is why it's an incredibly sought after and powerful artifact.
Hence being an oracle. All right, so why would you want to play Eberron? Let's close with this.
Okay, so before I ever looked and so basically somebody sold me on Eberron when they told me that it was like fantasy Borderlands. That's how I was sold on Eberron.
Yeah, if you've played the video game Borderlands. And that is certainly what the Adventures League Oracle of War campaign feels like as well. Eberron is something different that you can, pull on so many of these threads, so many of these ideas. It feels really compact, in the one book that you can pull so much of this, so many of these ideas from, whether you're a player or a dungeon master, and get up to no good. And maybe if you like the idea, again, of where, you're going to be playing adventures where you're going to have to make the tough choices, and maybe, it's not always the right thing to do, or maybe not the good thing to do, but maybe it's the bad thing. But, it's a world that, gives you tons of opportunities for those sorts of, hard choices.
So the inspiration for us running this fan meetup was because we decided as a group a little while ago that Unite the Factions was going to start running a lot of Eberron content because we are going to be putting on 2 epic events in the next 2 months.
Yeah, April 11th and May 16th.
That will feature the Eberron epics.
And I mean, there's, again, so much more to Eberron that we could talk about. If you've got some ideas and you want to share, either
I could have filled the hour talking about artificers. So
yeah. While I say, isn't it Artificer? And everyone tells me no. But thanks for joining us. Again, if you want to hear more about Eberron, feel free to reach out to us, or if you're watching this on YouTube, leave something in the comments, or better yet, come on to Discord, find the link on unitethefactions.com, where you can find out about all the stuff that we run.
Yeah, so once again, just close out and reiterate what Jeremy just said. Thanks for watching. We like doing these. We will be doing them for the near future, especially. And we plan on actually continuing and doing stuff like this once things go back to normal as well.
Oh, yeah, for sure. We can't wait to get back to Fan Expo and running tons of tables of D&D and seeing everybody, maybe run some panels, get some cool guests, authors running their adventures, all that good stuff. So Thanks, everybody, again.
Thanks for watching.
Yeah,
And
we'll see some of you next month or sooner on the Discord.
bye now.